Yeah, and I want to come to you, Majid. Um, we've heard from Jan that there are new cyber risks that are associated with developing a CBDC through DLT means. Are these things that, that the Saudi Central Bank is considering, and what ways are you trying to adapt to the new potential risks that come from developing a CBDC?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me. I think the aspects of the distributed ledger that Juan was talking about is definitely a challenging component for central banks dealing with a new payment system or a new digital currency like a CBDC. So one of the things that it takes us back to is the operational resiliency of the central bank. And I think Juan was talking a little bit about the risk framework, about how we look at those and how we evaluate things. And to me specifically, I think going back to the operational resiliency of the central bank is essential because it defines how you evaluate new technologies and new distributed ledger or centralized component of your CBDC. And it defines how you deal with vulnerabilities. It defines how you deal with software improvements and change management. It defines as well how you deal with asset management. When you're dealing with a distributed system, you have much more servers distributed among different cities, different areas. It has its own challenges. And you've mentioned denial of service attacks. That's as well a component where you when you're strong in terms of operational resiliency and risk management and how you produce systems, that's where you will be able to design a secure and safe CBDC. Now, from a central bank perspective, definitely it's something that the central bank is looking at in terms of, in general, CBDC system and also any financial technology system that is coming up, because it challenges the way that we used to think as a central bank. Now, from my experiences as well in the International Monetary Fund with other central banks, it's definitely something that central banks are looking to strengthen to basically be reflected into their CBDC and their development of their CBDC and their maintenance of the CBDC as it goes along.
Just to follow up on that, if you could give some practical examples of the type of work that you're doing to strengthen and ensure operational resilience, things like maybe the internal threat modeling that you might be doing. Are you using external providers to help with that? Could you give us a bit more context on what exactly, in more practical terms, you're doing there?
Well, let me combine my answer based on the recommendations that we work on the optimal solution that we give we give the teams that are working on such a project. That also reflects, again, the work that has been done previously with a number of central banks and how we deal with it. Now, to give you such an example, some central banks, and this is where the landscape is changing for the central banks, and I think this is where the most critical component for central banks to deal with CBDC is formed. And let me give some examples. Central banks are very well known to deal with risk management, to evaluate things. But when we're dealing with CBDC and the rapid change that is taking place in basically adopting a central bank digital currency, this is where you see the challenge, where the gaps in the operational resiliency is formed. Now, to give you an example, for example, the Security Operations Center. Central banks a number of central banks have mature SOC. We call it SOC, Security Operational Center. It's 24/7, 365 days a year. Now, when you start to investigate, a number of central banks, you definitely see some central banks that are actually missing SOC capabilities and limited time that they work on. With some central banks, they work from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. Now, with the CBDC, it's distributed in such way when we're talking about, of course, the retail, and it's more exposed than the previous old type of payment systems that central banks work with. So when you look at SOC in that scenario, you immediately find that it's not relevant to a CBDC. Now you need to your CBDC is basically exposed after 5 p.m. and midnight, and that's where the gaps are. There are also a number of examples. I don't want to dwell in them, but it's basically the operational resiliency of the central bank and how they deal with cybersecurity in general that will be reflected in their CBDC and the strength and resiliency of their CBDC.
Thank you. David, I want to come to you, just following up on that point where some central banks will have to change their current frameworks to be able to ward off any kind of cyber risk. What are your thoughts on what actions central banks need to take to be able to mitigate any of the new threats that may emerge?
My general,
Could you? Oh. Sorry. Thanks.
You know, my general feeling about this, I mean, first of all, when it comes to the actual cybersecurity risks, these guys already know how to deal with those risks. I mean, so you know, we all understand the basic risk management techniques, and we all understand, you know, threats and vulnerabilities and exposures. So we all know how to do that already. It's no different in that environment. Although actually I would say, I mean, I wouldn't speak for everybody in the room, but I mean, generally speaking, if you look at the sort of real world, like if you turn up at Heathrow and you can't check in because all the systems are down, or you go to the supermarket and you can't pay because Visa and MasterCard have gone down, or you can't get in your car because iCloud has gone down and you can't, that's generally not agents of a foreign power or, you know, meteorites or cosmic radii. I mean, generally it's management incompetence. So if you're looking like what is the biggest risk is management incompetence, because it always is. That's the biggest risk to everything. And we have to be very careful not to sort of go down the rabbit hole of these, you know, billion to one, or what if there's a cosmic radiation flare and so on. But the point is we know all of that. So the question is, what's the delta? What's going to be different with CBDC? And on that, I'm actually quite optimistic, because I think designing CBDCs now, in the light of modern technological developments, we have a set of toolkits available to us, which we did, I mean, zero-knowledge proofs and homomorphic encryption and cryptographic blinding and all this kind of thing. We have a toolkit available to us that we didn't have 25 years ago when the last generation of RTGS was put into place. So I'm not scared about this. I think we understand how to do the risk analysis, and we have new and better tools to deal with it. I think one very fundamental tool that we have in our, or one very fundamental defense that we have, I don't know if anybody has read the BIS Project Polaris report that came out this morning. You really should have been mandatory reading for everybody coming to this. I don't know what you were doing in the lunch break. But and actually there was the European Central Bank commentary on the digital euro this morning, which said, and I quote one line out of 90 pages or whatever it was, it said, offline use is mandatory if we're going to have a CBDC. And the BIS Project Polaris report, which came out today, was looking at the different ways of implementing that offline functionality. So one fundamental difference with CBDC, not only do we have these new tools to implement things, but it's going to work in a very different way. We're not going to have a big system in the middle that can fall over, or someone unplugs it to do the vacuuming and the economy falls apart. That's not going to happen, because CBDC isn't going to work that way. CBDC is going to work in any sane CBDC is going to work offline. There isn't going to be a central system that can fail. So therefore, the risk analysis switches to how do we use those new tools that are available to us now to manage the offline transfers securely, and I think that's doable. So in summary, my answer is we understand how to do the risk analysis. Everybody in this room understands how to do it. Actually, I think we should be optimistic about how it's going to work with CBDC.
Yeah. Jan, I'd like to follow up on that. Are you equally as optimistic that these new technologies can help bolster against cyber attacks?
Yes, I would have to agree with Sir in terms of optimism, just because CBDC is although CBDC is novel technology, most central banks do not develop it on themselves. They pursue collaborative undertaking with different stakeholders, particularly RTGS participants, payment system stakeholders, participating banks, and electronic money issuers, so that in the process, everybody learns, everybody determines which particular areas that the system may be weak at, and for which they would have to determine the mitigating controls and cybersecurity protocols that they need to place in just to make sure that it's secure. So I'm optimistic in that prospect in the context of the CBDC is actually being designed in such a way that most central banks are pursuing multi-stakeholder collaboration from all aspects, not just on the IT side, cybersecurity side of the central bank, but also on the cybersecurity side of the payment service providers.
Thank you. I want to shift the attention slightly. So we've spoken a bit about the central banks and their own operations and functions. I think from a lot of the discussions that we've had over the past day has suggested that a lot of the other checks when it comes to the consumers will probably be done by wallet providers, for example, in terms of KYC or AML. Do you think there might be some sort of tension there between if there are more stringent checks at that end to help with security concerns, that might end up adding to some sort of frictions? It might deter interactions with CBDCs. Do you think there is some sort of trade-off there? David, to come to you on that front.
I'm the wrong person to ask about. I mean, honestly, I think, basically almost all of the money that we spend on KYC, AML is completely wasted. I mean, it's the whole system is, if you came from outer space and said, look, here's it, we spend, I can't tell what it is, 180 billion, 200 billion a year we spend on KYC, AML, and according to the latest, I think the Europol figures were, we intercept 0.15% of fraudulent flows. It's a joke. We need to use the new technology in a new way. My personal opinion is we shouldn't have any barriers to entry at all. How do barriers to entry help? Like, if the bad guys are going to use it, like, we live in a world where we have laser beams and transistors and artificial intelligence now. If you make these expensive, pointless KYC barriers and the bad guys carry on using cash, sorry, central banks, but that's the predominant use of your product. If the bad guys carry on using cash, we have no idea what they're doing. If they're in the system, we can at least see what they're doing. We can use AI to track, if my wallet is sending money to a cave in the Bora Bora Mountains 3 times a week, then you can come and investigate me or look in a bit more detail. So I'm the wrong person to ask. My personal opinion is we should scrap the system completely. We should let anybody who wants CBDC have it, and we should use the modern technology we have at our disposal. I mean, ChatGPT could do a better job of AM than what we have at the moment, filling out suspicious transaction reports. Like, it's an Edwardian thing. Oh, I thought he was a good chap. But you know what? He might not be sending that £1 million a week to his mother after all, so we should have a sort of, like, come on. So if we're going to build a CBDC using the new technology, we should build the rest of it using the new technology as well. I told you I'm the wrong person to answer. Well, I think you should scrap the whole thing. Let anybody who wants a wallet have one.
I don't think you're the wrong person. I think that's a really interesting insight. And yeah, actually, we have a session coming up later today on AI and some of the implications of that. So hopefully we can go into that in a bit more detail. Majid, to come to you on that, are you things like artificial intelligence and new technologies? What are your views on that, and how are you trying to incorporate that in your operational resilience frameworks?
Absolutely. Now, I think I want to state that I'm definitely optimistic in terms of the CBDC and the technologies, and of course what has been mentioned by David and Juan. But I'm a bit short-term pessimistic because of the fact that central banks is still adopting some of the ways that we know and we've been using with risk assessments and using technologies and agile and DevSecOps and doing some of the aspects of security integrated in a much faster way. And I think that's where the gaps are. And there's a push for central banks to adopt around the world. We see a lot of central banks are actually moving ahead with pilots and with even almost going live with a limited use cases. And that's where I think the gaps are. For sure optimistic, but I think mid to long term central banks will start to get much better in dealing with digitalization and transformation projects like a CBDC. Now, going to the question that you've mentioned, artificial intelligence and machine learning, and some the new technologies definitely must be used to actually make these systems much safer and much um, uh, 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 secure. Now we have to keep in mind that some may say privacy and advocating for privacy. So I think going back to the requirements of the system on how to actually preserve a level of privacy defined very early stages of the project, as well as how much data you're going to be collecting and how much you will be able to capture and use these new technologies may answer that question, whether it's more implementable and easy to adopt, or is it more difficult and maybe it gives you this a false sense of security, like you have AI running, but you don't have that much data and you don't have that much information to actually get something out of these technologies. So I think it's definitely a balance, and it needs to be evaluated early on from the early stages of the project with well-defined requirements of the CBDC and the privacy and the AML CFT and all these aspects as well.
Thank you. Yeah, that's a nice segue into the second half of the discussion on privacy that I want to come to. Jan, just on that, are you seeing that? Are you approaching that in the same sort of way, in the sense of there needed to be some sort of balance between ensuring security and privacy?
It would really, for me, my view on that is that it really hinges on your policy objectives and your priorities in developing a CBDC in terms of balancing both security and privacy, because you need to maintain cybersecurity to foster trust and safety in the national payment system, while at the same time catering to the needs for privacy of the end users who would be adopting that payment system. At the same time, in another angle, balancing financial system integrity concerns for AML and KYC purposes. But I think one of the things that I have observed from other central bank experiments is that in terms of pursuing security and privacy, they need to balance that as well with scalability and the extent of decentralization that they would want to pursue in the design of their CBDC, because they call it the impossible trilemma between decentralization, security, and scalability, wherein you can only pick two, but not all three. So, and the choice for that will actually boils down to your policy objective. What are you trying to pursue? Are you trying to pursue efficiency? Are you trying to pursue financial inclusion? Are you trying to pursue safety? And so the ramifications and the implications of balancing those trade-offs would have to reflect what particular policy objective central bank would like to pursue in using a CBDC.
And where do you stand for the Central Bank of Philippines case? And I guess a bolt-on to that is, I believe you're pursuing a wholesale CBDC.
Yes,
do you think that differs then from a retail?
Exactly. Just because we're pursuing wholesale CBDC because that's where we find are the pain points in the national payment system and market failures for which our current payment solutions in the country are not yet available or not yet capable of addressing. Because, like for example, we didn't really push for retail CBDC because right now we're using our collaboration with the private sector in building and advancing our national retail payment system. We have the PesoNet, which is the batch settlement system, and the InstaPay, which is the fast payment system. And so our strategic priorities for the past 5 years is really to develop it, to onboard more Filipinos, to use digital payments for retail payments use cases, mostly using commercial bank money in the fast payment system and the batch settlement system. And so those payment systems are able to generate the benefits that are expected or are promised by retail CBDC, particularly retail payments, digitalization, and financial inclusion. And so we would rather focus our short to medium-term efforts on CBDC on the wholesale payments use cases, on cross-border payments and security settlement, just because we think that we can still be able to push for improvement in the quality of financial services that these payment service providers offer to their end users by being able to tackle the inefficiencies, the lack of transparencies and the fees associated with the settlement of cross-border payments, for example, for remittances. We see that if you're able to design a well-functioning, scalable wholesale CBDC of cross-border payments, then the banks that would be participating in that in the CBDC system would be able to offer better quality, cheaper, faster remittance services to end users. So we see that trickling down to the retail use case, even though the direct solution that we are working on are on wholesale CBDC use cases.
Thank you. Actually, yeah, just this brings on nicely to the cross-border point and how to tackle security and also privacy concerns when it comes to potential interlinking CBDCs or cross-border projects. I mean, with both the Philippines and Saudi Arabia, there's significant remittance flows, inflows and outflows. And I wonder, Majid, how are you considering those points on the cross-border?
Well, thank you. Well, I think one of the points that was mentioned is the policy. Juan was mentioning the policy of the privacy policy, and I think that is definitely one way to start looking at the privacy and how to define what is needed by the system to preserve the level of privacy that is defined within these policies. So when it comes to cross-border, definitely the central bank, the Saudi central bank has done some level of work there and have published a paper for a project called Aber. And some of the aspects that has been studied within that proof of concept project is, of course, the privacy aspect as well as many other aspects in terms of the cross-border challenges. So I think in terms of how do you approach it, the policy is one way, then examining if the policy is being applied onto the project well defined, if there is needs to update some of the policy aspects in terms of the privacy, you have that channel going back, but it's definitely something that you're experimenting, you're studying, you're doing a threat modeling on it, and of course considering the security aspect, because you don't have privacy without security. So it's something that you need to integrate in the way that you're doing your threat modeling and architecture risk analysis as you pursue the project.
Just to follow up on that, do you think then, while there's a lot of different experiments that are going on with various different central banks, many of who have different policy aims, which, as we've already discussed, might mean you fall somewhere different on that spectrum between privacy and security. Do you think some sort of stronger or better global regulations or frameworks would help to solve some of those cross-border frictions?
Well, definitely, I think the international bodies and international standards, or at least a seed in terms of the standards and requirements, would take us a long way in terms of looking at the baseline, trying to work towards that baseline. So I think I'm not sure if it will be applied globally when you have many different demographics and policies and regulations, but you can definitely take it as a starting point where you can find that balance between the countries that are participating in those cross borders.
Thank you. David, I want to bring things close to home here in the UK. We've seen, not just in the UK, but the US and parts of Europe as well, that there's, rightly or wrongly, some headlines and fears about how CBDCs might give powers to government to spy on its citizens. And we've seen in the Bank of England consultation paper, for example, they've said that they'll ensure privacy but not anonymity. And it's become a political issue, it seems. Do you think that's probably do you think that would be one of the biggest hurdles for there to be a CBDC in this country?
I think there. Oh, sorry. I mean, I think there are two different issues there that we have to sort of deal with quite separately, and I don't know what the answer is, I have to say. So first of all, there's the issue of, was it Robert Kennedy the other day on Twitter saying that the government was going to use alien technology from Area 51 through 5G towers to quantum teleport the money from vaccinated people to Satan or something. I didn't follow the exact details, but it was something along these sort of lines. I don't know exactly. So what can people like me do about that? I haven't got a clue. He's got 20 trillion Twitter followers. I've got like 12. Like, no one cares what I think about any of this stuff. So what are we going to do about that? I haven't got a clue. You need to talk to social anthropologists, not people like me. When it comes to actually implementing privacy, I think we do have a problem because, and it's a problem we want to have in a sense, in that there's no obvious international standard. Privacy is a very culturally dependent thing. Things that are considered culturally appropriate in other places might not be considered culturally appropriate in the UK and vice versa. And I can't see how we have no right to impose our standards on other people, and we should resist other people imposing their standards on us. So I can't see how you can have an international standard around that. I mean, the best that we can do is put some building blocks in place so they can be used in different ways in different sort of cultures. Now, I'll give a very simple example. I mean, I don't know if are there any lawyers in the room, just out of curiosity? Not because I'm worried about getting sued, but yeah. So isn't it true? People are going to think, foreign viewers will think I'm making this up, but this is absolutely true. Right now, the British government is trying to pass a law which will make it illegal for you to WhatsApp a picture of a dinghy. Is that true or not true? That's true, isn't it? I mean, it's literally, you can't make this up. So are we going to say, well, okay, our privacy standard is you're not allowed to use CBDC in any purchases or other transactions that involve rubber dinghies? Would that be kind of internationally acceptable to do? I mean, I don't see that somehow. So the idea there's going to be any kind of standard here, I don't get it. Okay, are there some building blocks we can put in place for people to use? Yes, and I think actually the things that we know about and have known about for 25 years about, you know, digital signatures and public key certificates, like we know all that stuff. We just don't do it. You know, I mean, you come from advanced countries. When I open a bank account, I have to take a photocopy of my gas bill, or my grandmother's gas bill from St. Petersburg. That's considered adequate in this country. So, you know, really, you shouldn't be looking to us for this kind of thing. We understand what the building blocks can be. I don't think we're going to be an exemplar for that at the moment. We should look to other countries, more advanced nations.
What do you think is the solution to that then? Or how would you?
What do I think?
How would you approach it?
I think the solution is that we have to have a digital identity infrastructure that allows population scale strong pseudonymity. So in other words, if I go and get a digital wallet from Barclays know that I'm Dave Birch, and that's fine. The digital wallet says I'm #1 Man City fan, or John Doe, or James Bond, or whatever else I want in my wallet. And if I get up to no good with that wallet, if I behave inappropriately with it, if I fund terrorism or do some money laundering or other things you're not supposed to do, and the police go to Barclays and say, who's James Bond? Well, Barclays will tell them it's me. So what's the problem? But if you go to Barclays and say, who's James Bond, they won't tell you. It's none of your business. So we can have perfectly good population scale managed pseudonymity that deals with this problem. I mean, I don't know how you'd explain that to legislators or regulators because, as I say, I don't really have the skills for that. But the point is, if you're asking me technically, do we know how to solve the problem? Yes, we do. Do we know culturally how to solve them as a society? I'm not so sure. I'm really not so sure.
Thank you. Jan, to come to you on that point then, as we've heard from David, there may be cultural differences in this. What is your approach from the Central Bank of Philippines to data protection? And how are you looking about the potential challenges there?
Actually, for data protection, we can work on what we have right now, what we know, what we have been implementing, and the approach is really to how do we see it evolve, the data protection guidelines and the laws, and how it shall and will evolve in case we will be adopting either a wholesale or retail CBDC. Because for our country, there are specific legal impediments, legal amendments that have to be made for us to be able to be given the authority, the Central Bank of the Philippines to be given the authority to issue a retail CBDC on the grounds of certain anti-money laundering, KYC laws, and Data Privacy Act for retail end users. So those aspects should be considered. So for us, in terms of data protection, the thrust really is imagining or envisioning how what we have and what we have been practicing so far would evolve and change to assimilate the use of a wholesale or retail CBDC. As to what Sir has been saying, I agree with him in terms of providing building blocks on what we know, what we have observed, what we have learned so far. And if I may add, probably do a stock take of the results and the lessons learned from experiments for different, for example, cross-border payments, CBDC use cases, and not treat them as silo. I think it's just that it's just difficult for a cross-border CBDC project to be organized in a way that would involve multiple countries at one time. So at least I understand that for practical reasons, only about 4 or 5 countries can join a multi-CBDC platform project, for example. But then the substance really is across those novel cross-border CBDC projects. I think it would be helpful for us to do a stock take of what we have learned, what we need to further focus on, and what are the policy implications, risk, and technology considerations that so far that we already know, and then what other areas should we need to focus on moving forward, rather than targeting an international standard at this point. Although I'm aware that IMF has already announced that they would be launching a capacity development or a CBDC handbook in October 2023. So that's the first point. And then for cross-border payments that you have mentioned earlier, I think that it's valid to anticipate that since different jurisdictions pursue different cross-border CBDC platforms, there's a risk of fragmentation again in terms of the divergence of cybersecurity standards and protocols that these cross-border CBDC projects are using or have been deploying. And so I think the stock taking of all the things and compilation of all those cybersecurity considerations and data protection practices that are found useful under a different context or for different specific use cases should be compiled, should be consolidated, and highlight specific areas that may be useful for other countries who would also want to pursue that use case for CBDC moving forward.
Yeah, thank you. Majid, similar question to you, and I mean, you touched on it before in terms of Project ABA and some of the conclusions that came out of that. Is there anything you could share with that, or any other insights on this privacy point or data protection?
Well, yeah, I think it was mentioned that the experimentation is actually a very an enabler component to really study the differences in terms of privacy, in terms of the security, specifically with the cross-border, because there's a lot of things that you don't, as is mentioned, you don't own, you don't have that control over, you cannot apply your standards or regulations or policy. So I think from a security perspective, experimentation, studying your design, studying the risk, doing a risk assessments on the design, on the threat modeling aspect of the system, including privacy, including other aspects as well, is your key to success. And I think the stock taking is as well a fundamental point. If central banks are doing some experimentations, and we've seen a number of them published, we really want to read about these experimentations and the lessons learned. Now, from the experimentation of the project Aber, absolutely, we have learned a lot in terms of the design, the use cases, and some difficulties, pain points. Some of also the technology was mostly driven from a technology perspective. We've learned a lot from that perspective, and that's where it's just a starting point, and it needs to be a continuation of an experimentation of many aspects, including, of course, the aspects that goes beyond my expertise when you're talking about regulatory, when you're talking about policy and other aspects as well. But from a technology perspective, from a design, from a security, that's where you gain a lot. And again, I think we mentioned it many times. These are things that in security and the technology world we've been doing for many years. It's just that we're applying it now on a different scale between central banks on systems that may be more exposed, if it's retail, if it's wholesale, if it's a combination. It's just that you're figuring out these and you're applying the best practices and as well the defense in depth of the system as well.
Thank you. One last question for me before we open it up to the audience, and we can take a look at the poll results as well quite soon. For David, again, coming back to this country, we've heard the views from Philippines and Saudi Arabia, where perhaps unsurprisingly, it's more, I guess, a technical point than a cultural point. I do wonder, I mean, again, in this country, we're very willing to use credit cards or debit cards, or we're very willing to give over our data to Amazon and Facebook and Google and Apple and all these major corporations, but once the question comes to a CBDC and the government, suddenly there's fears there. I know you said you're not necessarily sure how to approach that. Do you think some of it is a question of convenience then, or if there's a strong enough use case for a CBDC that it will show that it will give people good value, that the privacy point comes secondary almost?
I mean, I genuinely think that most people couldn't care less one way or the other. I mean, if you sort of draw the sort of bell curve of it, there's like 5% of people like me who think about this stuff and think about technological solutions and how to privacy, whatever. And there's like 5% of people who think space aliens are going to control it and the whole thing's a disaster. But most people in the middle, I think, don't really care one way or the other. And I think the revealed evidence of that is, you see these countless experiments all the time on social media and things like that. But so you go up to people in the street and you say, do you think privacy is important? Do you take cybersecurity seriously? They go, yes, yes. Do you think you should be? Yes, of course I can, whatever. Here's a Mars bar, what's your password? Oh, it's password 123. It's always password 123, so. So I think, most people don't care. I think, the implication of that is that we as the industry have to make that privacy infrastructure for them. I think it's very, I just don't buy that whole, put people in charge of their own data, give them the responsibility, let people, I just don't buy any of that. I mean, we have to create that private infrastructure. As for the public, most people don't care. But the ones that do care are noisy and annoying. We have to have a message,
Yeah, I suppose the message there is maybe we shouldn't look too much at Twitter and social media in some cases.
It is a character flaw. I really shouldn't do it. But, yeah.
I wonder if we could get up the poll results. I'd like to get the views of our guests here on that. I think we should have it up now. So just a reminder as to we asked which cyber risk represents the most significant threat to secure CBDC operation. Pretty even split there. The two most popular answers being users losing credentials to social engineering attacks and digital counterfeiting, and quantum computing there not too far behind. Jan, I'd like to get your take on that. Is that something that surprises you?
Sorry, I think given what we have in the retail payments sphere right now, the usual suspects in the headlines would be digital counterfeiting and losing credentials. But for project management, I think for project management scope for CBDC, item E is likewise interesting in terms of post-quantum computing. I mean, our technology, our tests for pilot and experiments should also consider quantum computing as a possibility moving forward, just to make the model and prototype robust and anticipative of future hacks. And yep, thank you.
Thank you. And yeah, Majid, hopefully you were able to see those results. Any thoughts on this?
Yes, I'm looking at the results. I think the quantum computing, of course, as today, as we stand, we can see the risk of quantum computers, but I think in 2024, we will have the encryptions and the algorithms that will be quantum safe. And I think that will start to reduce the risk and reduce the issues that may be posed by quantum computers. But of course, you always have the legacy systems and upgrading and updating the legacy systems into your new quantum safe algorithms. So that will be a challenge. So the risk is there, but I don't think it's as high as the other type of issues that a system like a CBDC could have. Just a simple example, going back again to resiliency and the operational resiliency. updating a critical vulnerability takes, I think, about an average of 23 days, if I'm not mistaken, from the last statistics that I've seen. Now, if you apply that to a central bank digital currency and a zero-day vulnerability is exposed today, and even the fix is developed today, how fast will the central banks and the operational industry will have to patch these vulnerabilities? These will be the type of questions, I think, for a retail CBDC, and the challenges for a retail CBDC would be, strengthening the operational resiliency will be, the most bang for the buck of the central bank digital currency. But I think, again, going back to the vulnerabilities and the issues that was shown, you will have operational issues and risks, and it may be different, and it will all boil down to the way you do your risk assessment of the project and the way you strengthen your operational resiliency within the central bank and within the entire ecosystem of the CBDC.
Thank you. Yeah, David, your thoughts?
I was going to say, I mean, I don't want to deliberately inflame the audience, but I mean, I think you're wrong about almost everything on that, really. I think you haven't really thought this through properly. So, I mean, quantum computing isn't a threat to CBDC unless you're a moron. I mean, no central bank is going to build a CBDC that's vulnerable to quantum. That's not going to happen. I mean, unless agents of a foreign power are able to infiltrate the IT department and persuade them to do it. So I agree with Majid. Quantum's not because we're going to build quantum-resistant cryptography. So that's not. Although I am quite excited about quantum computing, because remember, there's about $250 billion worth of Bitcoin, which is sitting in wallets where the keys have been lost. So once you get a quantum computer, if I invented a quantum computer, I wouldn't waste my time trying to use it to steal e-naira, I can tell you right now. If I get a quantum computer, I'm going straight to the Satoshi wallets. This is money beyond the dreams of avarice. So, so if anyone's interested in funding quantum computers, let me, So that's not digital counterfeiting doesn't make any sense. I literally don't understand what that means. You can't you can clone something that's digital.
Yeah, I think that was the
which you're not going to do because obviously the system's got to work offline. That means the private keys have to be held in secure hardware. You can't clone that hardware. So digital counterfeiting, I think, is not an issue. Abuse by users with privileged roles, only the most rudimentary. I mean, this is if you're going to have the thing designed by school kids. Would that be a problem? That's not going to happen in a real thing. Users losing credentials, social engineering attacks, I don't see that. And my kind of data point on that would be the UK is like the home of fraud. Fraud is absolutely out of control here. It's completely rampant. The figures came out this morning. It's grown 1 billion%. I don't even know. I didn't even read it. But the point is, fraud is completely out of control in the UK, particularly push payment fraud. There was a wonderful story on the BBC a couple of weeks ago about a chap who was about to send £125,000 to, I think I'm right in saying Thailand, but I might be wrong, to his beautiful bride-to-be who was about to get on a plane and come to the UK. And Lloyds Bank wouldn't send the money because their fraud detection system had said this was a scam. And he said, well, you have to send the money. So Lloyds Bank called him into the branch and sat him down and said, this is a scam. And he said, no, it isn't. You have to send the money. So Lloyds Bank had to send the money. He's the customer, right? Of course it was a scam. And now Lloyds Bank is liable for £125,000 under the contingent reimbursement scheme. So the idea that you're going to socially engineer the private keys out of my chips, that's never going to happen. The social engineering is a higher level. It's not about CBDC. It's whether it's instant payments or CBDC. The threat isn't to CBDC. The threat is people are kind of stupid, and it's not really within our power to fix that, is it? I don't.
Financial literacy, I suppose.
Well, financial literacy, I have very limited. I mean, generally speaking, in a conference, if someone says, well, basically we just have to educate the public, I'm like, well, let me just stop you right there, because I mean let's call that Plan B, because you touched on AI. We're going to hear more about it later on. If there's a defence against this sort of thing, It's AI. It's not educating people. It's taking control away from people to do it. Sorry.
Yeah, and you had something to add to
If I
that.
may just add to what he's been saying, I think the audience is just probably associating their experience, their exposure to cybersecurity incidents related to digital payments in terms of answering this survey question, because there is no widely used retail CBDC yet that has, been exposed to this risk or incident. So I think that's the result. Yep. But he has made a lot of more sense when he mentioned the possibility. If it's really CBDC, would this really be imminent risks? Considerations, but not really highly significant and probable incidents.
But if somebody designed your CBDC so that a privileged user could steal all the money, well, you'd be the privileged user, wouldn't you? Just steal all the money. We'd never see you again. No, but the point is, you'd fire somebody who came to you with a design like that. So I don't think.
I guess it comes back to your original point that a lot of it is a management issue rather than a design point.
I don't want to get on my hobby horse about that.
Well, let's maybe open it up to the floor then for any questions. Yeah, we have a gentleman in the front.
Thank you. David, first of all, I didn't participate in poll, so so I'm not in that stupid league. So I think one of the issues we have in cybersecurity is lack of standardization, because, and I can give example, for example, you got iPhones, you got Android phones, and there is a proliferation of technology. That is what is causing most of the pain in the industry today. So how does technology standardization in CBDC look like?
Can I say, are you here as an interested member of the general public, or do you have some affiliation?
Well, I work for BNP Paribas. I work
The standard, I mean, there are international standards around security, but I think you're asking a slightly different question, which is to what extent can central banks make Apple and Google do anything with their, I mean, given that the EU has been trying for God knows how many years to get Apple to open up their secure elements for EMV, I wouldn't hold out really high hopes on that sort of thing. On the other hand, because Apple and Google implement standardized cryptography in those secure elements, because in any design of CBDC, we're not going to try and invent new cryptography or whatever. Is it possible that we can find ways to use those standard components in a better way? I'm quite optimistic about that. I mean, if you think about it, an iPhone is, I mean, I'm sure you guys have had the sort of same experience because you're a little bit younger than me, but when I was first in this sort of business, if you're talking about the Bank of England Central Gilts Office or Central Money Markets Office, the secure elements were those Rakel boards in PCs that cost like $15,000 each, and now those chips cost 45 cents. So using standardized components in those ways means that the security in an iPhone is as good as the security was in those boards all those years ago. So, can we force any kind of standardization on them? I don't know. But if you see what's happening at the moment with FIDO and passkeys and things like that, there's lots of positive things happening. So, I don't know, Majid, I'm kind of optimistic on that. What do you think?
Well, I agree with you. I think the standardization of some of these aspects will help and assist on at least maybe starting and designing some of the aspects. Now, we know, for example, I've mentioned NIST in 2024, and there's a competition and it's open and you could see the results and you could even examine some of these standards that are out there. So I wouldn't say that, it's 100% trust, but you will definitely evaluate and you could start from these excellent points to build and to reuse.
Thank you. I think we have time for just one more question, if we have any in the room. No, otherwise, maybe Jan, if you wanted to touch on this, the same point about the tech standardization.
Tech standardization, for me, probably if the technology on CBDC and if the technology for CBDC is being explored are already mature, and the latter part stages of technology development, probably we can consider standardization. But in the early phases, just to promote innovation, fresh ideas and not being complacent with what's available and standardizing them.
Fair point.
I'd rather suggest that we explore what we can explore in a way that can satisfy our security and scalability objectives. And then when everything's mature, when the policy risk and prudential concerns are already being addressed, then and that is safer, that you can see that this can be used broadly for business individuals, then that's probably the time that we can consider standardization.
Thank you. I think unfortunately we'll probably have to wrap it up there. I've thoroughly enjoyed this panel. I hope you have as well. I'd like to thank David, Jan, and Majid for your wonderful insights. Yeah, please join me in a round of applause.
Thank you.
I'll hand over to my colleague Taylor, who will be introducing the next session. Thank you.